The room had been filled with applause only seconds earlier, but the moment Everett Sloan walked through the glass doors, the entire ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. He was wearing a plain charcoal suit that had been carefully pressed but was clearly years old, his shoes polished so many times that the leather had begun to lose its shine, and in his hand he carried a thin folder with bent corners. He looked nothing like the executives gathered around the tables beneath the enormous crystal chandeliers. Yet before Everett had taken even 5 steps inside, a billionaire CEO at the front table slowly pushed back his chair and stood. Then another followed. Then a third. 3 of the most powerful business leaders in the country rose together, their eyes fixed on the man everyone else had dismissed as a nobody. And the most astonishing part was that Everett did not seem surprised. He simply lowered his eyes, swallowed hard, and kept walking as though he had spent his entire life trying not to take up too much space. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change a person's life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps our community bring more stories of courage, compassion, and second chances to people who may need them most. 3 hours earlier, Everett had been standing outside the same ballroom wondering whether he should turn around and go home. The invitation in his pocket had been given to him by a woman who had once believed in him when almost nobody else did, and the event was supposed to celebrate leaders who had transformed American business through innovation and social responsibility. Everett had no company listed beside his name, no executive title, no private assistant, and no entourage. He was there because a small non-profit organization he volunteered with had nominated him for a Community Impact Award. The nomination had described his work helping unemployed workers rebuild their careers after layoffs, but Everett never considered himself important enough to stand among executives whose companies employed tens of thousands of people. His greatest accomplishment, in his own mind, was simply making sure that people who had fallen through the cracks knew someone still cared. For 23 years, Everett had worked in places where nobody bothered to learn his last name. He had started his career loading trucks at a distribution center in Ohio, later moving into inventory management because he was good with numbers and even better at noticing problems before they became disasters. He had eventually become a logistics analyst, but when the company underwent restructuring, his position disappeared. At 46, with a mortgage, an aging mother to care for, and a daughter preparing for college, Everett suddenly found himself unemployed. He applied everywhere. He attended career fairs. He rewrote his resume until every sentence sounded like someone else's life. He was repeatedly told that he was overqualified, underqualified, too experienced, not experienced enough, or simply not the right fit. What hurt most was not rejection itself. It was how quickly people stopped seeing him as a person once his job disappeared. Former colleagues stopped returning calls. Recruiters sent automated messages. Friends who had once asked for advice about their careers suddenly seemed too busy to answer his messages. Everett learned that society often confuses a person's position with a person's value. Without a title beneath his name, he became invisible. During the worst period of his unemployment, Everett began volunteering at a community employment center called Harbor Bridge. He started by helping people write resumes, but soon he was doing much more. He drove elderly workers to interviews when they had no transportation. He bought interview clothes at thrift stores for people who could not afford them. He helped a single mother practice answering difficult questions. He spent Saturdays teaching older workers how to use online application systems. When people became discouraged, Everett never told them that everything would magically work out. Instead, he reminded them that rejection was an event, not an identity. One of the people Everett helped was a warehouse worker named Colin Mercer, who had been fired after an injury and had almost given up looking for work. Everett noticed something in Colin that Colin himself could no longer see. He helped him rebuild his resume around his practical knowledge and eventually introduced him to a local manufacturer. Colin was hired as a safety coordinator. Years later, that same man would become the chief operating officer of a rapidly expanding manufacturing company. Everett never expected anything in return. Another person he helped was a young woman named Meredith Vale, whose small technology business was collapsing under the weight of poor supply chain decisions. Everett volunteered to review her operation. He discovered that she was losing thousands of dollars each month because of a problem buried in her purchasing process. He spent several weekends helping her restructure the system. Within 2 years, her company had expanded nationally. Meredith remembered. So did Colin. And so did a quiet entrepreneur named Grant Holloway, whom Everett had helped after Grant's father died and left him responsible for a struggling family business. Everett had once told Grant that leadership was not about being the smartest person in the room. It was about making sure the people in the room could succeed together. Grant remembered those words for more than a decade. Everett, however, remembered something else. He remembered the afternoon his former CEO, Malcolm Voss, had called him into an office and told him that his position was being eliminated. Malcolm had been a brilliant businessman, polished and confident, with a reputation for turning struggling companies into profitable ones. But he had also developed a habit of judging people by titles, salaries, and connections. When Everett later applied for another position at the company, Malcolm recognized his name and dismissed him in front of several executives. Everett had entered the interview wearing the same careful suit he now wore to the gala. Malcolm glanced at his resume and made it clear that someone like Everett did not belong in rooms where major decisions were made. The final insult came when Malcolm referred to him as a nobody who had mistaken hard work for importance. Everett carried those words for years. Not because he believed them. Because some part of him feared they might be true. That fear followed him into the ballroom. As Everett approached the entrance, Malcolm Voss happened to be standing near the reception area. Time had made Malcolm older but not gentler. He was now the CEO of a major financial services company and one of the evening's honored guests. When he recognized Everett, surprise crossed his face before amusement replaced it. Malcolm looked at Everett's simple suit, then at the invitation in his hand. He seemed almost entertained by the idea that Everett had been invited. Everett said nothing. He simply handed the invitation to the attendant. The attendant checked the list and smiled warmly, welcoming Everett inside. Malcolm watched him walk away. Then, within minutes, Everett found himself surrounded by people who seemed uncomfortable with his presence. Some whispered. Others looked at his worn folder. A few assumed he must be someone's assistant. Everett didn't correct them. He had become accustomed to being underestimated. The award ceremony began shortly afterward. Everett sat near the back, listening as executives described billion-dollar investments, international expansions, technological breakthroughs, and ambitious visions for the future. He applauded everyone sincerely. Then his name appeared on the screen. The room grew quiet. The presenter explained that Everett Sloan had spent years helping displaced workers rebuild their lives, often using his own money to help people attend interviews and acquire professional clothing. The presenter explained that dozens of people had found employment because of his guidance, and several successful business leaders had credited Everett with influencing the way they treated their own employees. Everett lowered his head. He did not want the attention. Then the presenter made one final announcement that changed the atmosphere completely. 3 Fortune 500 CEOs had personally requested to present Everett with his award. The first was Meredith Vale. The second was Colin Mercer. The third was Grant Holloway. Everett stared toward the stage, stunned. Then Meredith stood. Colin stood. Grant stood. The audience followed their movement with confused expressions. Malcolm Voss remained seated. The 3 CEOs walked toward the stage, but before they reached it, Everett entered the center aisle. That was the moment captured in everyone's memory. The moment 3 extraordinarily successful people stood because one ordinary-looking man had entered the room. Meredith reached Everett first and embraced him. Colin shook his hand with tears already forming in his eyes. Grant placed a hand on Everett's shoulder. None of them treated him like a charity case. They treated him like the reason they had become better leaders. Meredith explained that when her company nearly failed, Everett had been the only person who helped without asking for ownership, money, or recognition. Colin explained that Everett had saved his career when Colin had believed his life was over. Grant explained that Everett's advice had changed the culture of his company and influenced how he treated employees during difficult periods. Then Grant revealed something Everett had never known. Years earlier, the three of them had quietly created a workforce development foundation inspired by Everett's example. They had funded training programs across several states, helping thousands of displaced workers find new careers. Everett's philosophy had become part of their organizational culture. The room was silent. Malcolm Voss finally stood. For the first time in years, his confidence appeared to have disappeared. He walked toward Everett slowly, stopping several feet away. He did not attempt to shake Everett's hand immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and admitted that the cruel words he had spoken years earlier had been wrong. Everett looked at him for a long moment. There was no anger in his face. Only sadness. Malcolm admitted that he had spent years measuring people by their titles and bank accounts because he was terrified that without his own success, he would have no value. He realized too late that he had spent his life climbing higher while becoming smaller inside. Everett could have humiliated him. Everyone in the room would have understood. Instead, Everett stepped forward and offered his hand. Malcolm looked at it as though it were something precious. He took it. Everett told him that forgiveness did not erase what happened, but it could prevent the past from controlling the future. Malcolm's eyes filled with tears. Then Everett did something that surprised everyone. He asked Malcolm to help fund Harbor Bridge. Not as punishment. Not as payment. As an opportunity to make something useful from his regret. Malcolm agreed. Months later, Harbor Bridge expanded into a much larger workforce center. Everett was offered a prestigious executive position, but he chose something different. He became the director of community partnerships, spending his days meeting unemployed workers, mentoring young professionals, and reminding people that losing a job did not mean losing their worth. The story of the gala spread throughout the business community, but Everett never became obsessed with recognition. When people asked him what it felt like to have 3 Fortune 500 CEOs stand for him, he always remembered something much simpler. He remembered the people who had once sat alone in waiting rooms with resumes in their hands, wondering whether anyone would ever believe in them again. He remembered the people who had cried in his office after receiving rejection emails. He remembered the single mother who eventually bought her first home. He remembered Colin. He remembered Meredith. He remembered Grant. And he remembered the version of himself who had once stood outside a glass building wondering whether he belonged inside. Years later, Everett returned to the same ballroom for another community award ceremony. This time, he did not walk in alone. Behind him came dozens of people whose lives had changed because someone had once decided that they were worth helping. Everett stopped at the entrance and looked around. The chandeliers still shone above him. The tables were still filled with powerful people. But Everett no longer felt small. He finally understood that greatness had never been about being the richest person in the room. It was about becoming the person who made others believe they could rise. And sometimes, the person everyone calls a nobody is the very person who quietly changes the lives of everybody. Before we reach the final moment of this story, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe is more valuable: a person's title, their wealth, or the way they treat others when nobody is watching. Your words may encourage someone in our community who is struggling to remember their own worth. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because Everett's story leaves us with a truth worth carrying wherever we go: a job can disappear, money can be lost, status can change, and titles can be taken away, but kindness leaves fingerprints on people's lives that time cannot erase. The world may overlook you because it cannot see your value immediately, but never mistake being overlooked for being insignificant. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the greatest legacy. Sometimes the person standing in the back is the reason everyone else eventually learns how to stand tall. And sometimes, when the world calls someone a nobody, life has a beautiful way of bringing the right people to their feet.